after a busy day, lots of meetings and calls and whatever you are doing all day. So the invitation is to mute yourself and do 1 minute of self-guided meditation. So in a minute, I will invite you back. So you can close your eyes, take a deep breath, or 2, or even 3, and then arrive and let go of everything that is in your head now. Okay, whenever you're ready, you can start to open your eyes and arrive here with us. And while we have a few more people joining, I invite you to write on the chat box one thing you're grateful for. We usually do that sharing with each other, but since we're many people, we're going to put on the chat box, and it's always a good reminder, right? That there's always things to be grateful for. And also, if you want to put on the chat box your name, your affiliation, and your bioregion, that will be very welcome, so we can know who is here with us. And I'll go through some agreements for our meeting as well. Probably quite familiar with Zoom this far of the pandemic, but it's always a good reminder to keep yourself muted if you're not speaking. And you're welcome to speak, but also to give space to others to share what they think. When you agree with something, you can tinkle your fingers like this. And we would like to invite 2 people to be our heart keepers. That means someone or 2 people that will be aware and with attention to capture the intangible and the, let's say, the heart and the emotions and the things that are not obviously said, but that make our meeting very special. So please, if you want to be a heart keeper, maybe raise your hand, and then Faith can say their name so they're aware they have a mission for the next hour and a half.
If you could raise your digital hand, that would
be your
be
digital hand. Yeah, sorry. and raising your digital hand works for now to be a volunteer, to be a heart keeper, but also whenever you want to say something, okay? So again, inviting you to, if you just arrived, inviting you to put something you're grateful for, as well as your name, your affiliation, and your bioregion. I'd also like to present some of our guests in the panel today. Renata, that's me. Anne, who works alongside me from Be the Earth, is waving. I think you can see her. Hillary, who's here representing Calliopeia Foundation, and Raquel, or also Raquel, depending on your accent, who's one of our partners in Be the Earth, that will share a bit of the story of how is it to be trusted with funds, and how can we build this relationship based on trust to create the change we dream of, right? So we can also go through today's agenda very quickly. So as I said, we're going to have the panel that is going to be held by Ruth from Regenerosity. I guess most of you know her. And then each guest is going to have a quick moment of sharing their story and their practice. And then we're going to go to a small warm-up breakout group so we can do a fishbowl activity after. So we'll take you through when it's the time. Okay, so enjoy and welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thanks so much, Renata. And it's my pleasure to welcome everyone again. We are Regenerosity, and like Renata said, Renata and Anne are joining us from Be the Earth, and we are so pleased to be co-facilitating this webinar together. And Regenerosity is a collective of multiple funders and prize programs facilitated by the Buckminster Fuller Institute and also with the Lush Spring Prize, who I work for. And Ruth, who is our panel host today, also works with Lush. My name's James, by the way. So I am part of the Spring Prize coordination team, and along with the Fuller Challenge, Buckminster Fuller, the UNDP's Equator Prize, and others, we are Regenerosity. Our aim is to move funding in aid of regeneration. And actually now I'm in Germany, about an hour away from where the devastating floods have been, and I'm reminded of the need for this. A lot of papers are saying that this is a once-in-a-lifetime flooding, maybe some of you have seen in the papers. But we know that events like this are going on, and this is the effect of climate change hitting us now. And of course, the devastating heat waves in the US. And of course, we know that I've mentioned 2 global north countries, but the real effects of climate change will be felt by people in the global south most intensely. But the happy news is that we have solutions, and through Regenerosity, we are seeing the fantastic work of regenerative practitioners around the world. And part of our aim is to highlight those and to celebrate, and also have this reciprocal energy with these amazing projects. So through the Fuller Challenge, through Spring Prize, through the UNDP's Equator Prize, we have met and connected with hundreds of fantastic regenerative projects around the world. And it's our mission to celebrate, highlight, and resource their work. And we also receive a lot of fantastic learning from them. Our aim is to spread $10 billion in the next 10 years in aid of regeneration. And we work with these 3 principles: whole systems, around looking at effects that go beyond just simple one-step solutions, but they are systemic. They meet ecological needs, they meet social needs and economic benefits. We call this cascading benefits, that regenerative work has many effects that ripple out, like positive benefits, like ripples on a lake, rippling out. Reciprocal resources around transforming financial capital into living capital. We help to channel finance to regenerative projects and the regenerative movement, but we know that financial capital is not the only capital, and we also see our connections. We see the amazing projects in our network as wealth holders of living wealth, of cultural wealth, and this truth we hope to bring to light through Regenerosity. And of course, development, looking for those authentic relationships, just like this webinar is all about, those trust-based relationships, those relationships that go beyond damaging power relationships that are that have been so in place for many generations. So how do we untangle and redevelop the relationships between different wealth holders? So that's Regenerosity, and you can find out a lot more about us at regenerosity.world, and hopefully during this webinar as well too. And I'll pass on to Renata, who'll tell us a bit more about Be the Earth.
Thanks, James. Before I share about Be the Earth, I just want to make sure we have 2 heart keepers. I think I saw Amanda raising her hand, but Faith can.
And if we can get one other volunteer, that would be great.
Basically, to be an observer and take some notes of great moments that are not necessarily said, but felt. And then you're going to share it with us by the end of the meeting. Anyone? Let's see, maybe they'll come with the time. So far, Amanda, count on you. Okay, so a little bit about Be the Earth Foundation. We are a very new family foundation. We're just over a year old. And we believe in a world that nurtures all beings. So basically, we are a hybrid fund that works with impact investment and philanthropy under the same vision to nurture all beings. This started when my partner realized, who was already into the into the impact investment, and he realized how many people would do philanthropy, but using money that comes from a very unaligned source of capital. And then he just said like, this doesn't make that much sense that we're funding things that we're fighting against, but we're paying it with the money of what we're fighting against. So that's what made us start this. Can you go to the next slide, James, please? Yeah. So just like our ancestors, we gather around food. So basically our main cause is the food system. And that's because we want to reconnect humans with nature. And I guess food is a great reminder, because most of the things we eat, or at least what we should be eating, comes from nature, and we do eat every day. So it's always a good reminder. And there's a lot of key themes that orbit around that, like community, like localization, or indigenous knowledge, and many others that orbit around it. But that's our key theme that guides all of our work, especially locally, right? And we are entangled in the web of life. What does that mean? So it means that we are very interested to feed our ecosystem, and we work with the systemic change approach, meaning like that we want to leverage our partners' impact and our own impact with resources that go beyond capital. So basically, we disencourage relationships that are just transactional grants. We'd like to build partnerships. We like to connect people that can increase each other's impacts and feed each other's work, or provide a service that the other needs. So basically working in a network with very intentional action to make that happen, because we know it's not that easy. So many networks are there, and we hope it to work organically. So we try to be a bit more active on that to make those connections happen. And we're still learning a lot. But it's a great adventure. And then lastly, just quickly. So basically the part of investments, it's basically all of our capital that generates any income, it's reinvested in philanthropy, and all of our investments are impact focused. So we're also working with the same due diligence process to do both investments and philanthropy. So we like to have the same criteria and the same vision, as much, even though there are different approaches for different kind of business or social organizations or things like that. We'd like to combine as much as possible to look for this coherence in terms of like, okay, what is generating money? Is it the same thing that feeds what we're trying to build with the philanthropy capital. So, and the philanthropy, as I said, we avoid doing just transactional grants. We like building partnerships. We did a lot of learn by doing last year, in our first year. And we ended up creating a few programs that are like our special babies, let's say. And one of them, and we'll share with you in a bit. But yeah, basically with the philanthropy and investments also, we have different skills, different parts of the system. And we try to connect as much as possible opportunities and knowledges and exchange this so we can all walk towards the vision we want to see happening. And if you want to learn more, you can go to our website and feel free to explore, get in touch. And yeah, I'll pass on to Ruth. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Renata. And I think to just start saying that I think it was 2020, last year, we did one of our first webinars around regenerative philanthropy was with Marian Weber, who does flow funding and who started doing this form of giving that is called flow funding. And this is a little bit of a sequence to that initial webinar about trust-based philanthropy. And it's really to go deeper into what are the conditions for trust. Like when we talk about trust-based philanthropy, we have different funders and projects and funds that are at different stages of this continuum or this direction of travel towards trust. But what do we need to get there? And it's again, very based on the stories of people who are already doing it. And just to start with a very brief story, the reason why we're doing all of this together is that Renata and I actually have known each other for a very long time in Brazil. Like we met maybe 10 years ago or 8 years ago when we were both working, actually running projects. And then we met again in a funder circle and we were like, wait a minute, we know each other. So, and what we have noticed is because there is this trust and the relationship, we were able to collaborate as funders very quickly. We very quickly made decisions to spend money and to co-invest. And, you know, one call, like, we're looking for someone that can fund with us. And they were like, oh, we've just funded this in a way that didn't create any bureaucracy for the groups being funded. Quite the contrary, it allows us to very quickly move money to places that are in an emergency right now. So it also made us think about how do we share the stories also from this place of, trust between funders and fundees, and how do we trust by proxy? Yeah, imagine if we build a really solid global network where those trust relationships are already there. How much bureaucracy and due diligence do we have to we can put outside because we can trust by proxy? If I trust Renata, I know that any groups she funds, we can also fund without due diligence. And that's the whole concept of regenerosity. Make it easy to move money to regenerative projects. So yeah, I just wanted to center like the topic of the webinar, and then some of the core inquiries, like, you know, how do we extend this trust? How do we deliberately develop these networks of trust? What do we need to remove the bureaucracy, but at the same time have, I would say, a appropriate level of due diligence that's not overkill, but also, you know, what does due diligence look like from a group perspective? And then how do we do that? What are some social and technological tools and processes and frameworks that can support this sharing of power? And how can we base everything on storytelling? Because we still believe that it's through stories that we can start sending this message that there is a different way of moving money and a different way of sharing power around the reciprocal movement of wealth, as James talked about. Right, and in order to do this, we have some great speakers today. We're going to start with a little presentation from each. So, and then we're gonna bring everyone together onto a panel with a fishbowl, so with lots of participation as well. So to begin with, we have another foundation that's also from this network of trust of ours. And it's my pleasure to invite Hilary Hart, from Calliopeia Foundation. And Hilary currently lives in New Mexico. She's the author of 4 books on mysticism and the sacred feminine, and has been on a Sufi path since 1998. She works at Calliopeia Foundation as a program officer, where it's been possible to really express these deep values of heart through creative partnerships and trust-based grant making. So we're going to hear about how Calliopeia has been on this path of sharing power, of helping to evolve this emergent field of trust-based philanthropy. Over to you, Hilary, and thank you for being here. It's the first time we meet, so it's also a pleasure to be here.
Oh, thank you so much, Ruth. And I want to say first, thank you, everybody. This is already, I feel like I'm learning and getting inspired. So it's a real pleasure to be here. And really the first thing I want to say is that Calliopeia is really new to this whole approach of trust-based philanthropy. We are very committed to it, but really new and trying things out. We're a small foundation. There are 2 program officers, a director of grant making. We all work very closely together to explore ways that we can improve our systems mostly. So again, just to say we're new, and I'm really excited to be here to learn mostly. So Calliopeia's mission is to reconnect culture, ecology, and spirituality, or actually reconnect ecology, culture, and spirituality. So we're very upfront with the approach of interconnectedness. And we bring in a sense of depth in our conversations with each other, in the way we are evaluating our systems, and in the way that we relate to grantees and potential grantees. We really, really hope and try to come back constantly to this deep sense of humanity. We are human beings with a deep longing for a better world. And we seek out other people with similar approaches and similar commitments. And so sort of the overarching and deep foundation of our work is relationship. It's really relationship with people who share our longing. And that is not always easy to institutionalize, or to bring systems into alignment with that depth. So, I'm just gonna list off a few things that we're trying, but just as a foundation, none of these are perfect. And they're just attempts of Calliopeia to bring our work closer and closer to the heart, really, and to the ways that people are sharing a creative vision of love and what the world can be like, and how the world can reflect love and care for each other and for the earth. So some very simple things. We're trying recently to revamp all of our forms so that they reflect a deep honoring of people's time. We don't want people to spend a lot of time writing big proposals that really don't serve the process of getting to know each other. So we're revamping our forms, our reporting forms, and our proposals. We are also telling potential grantees that the written proposals are really a very small part of the grant making process for us, that we really are going to have conversations. We want to do site visits. We want to get to know people. We want to develop relationships, really. We used to have, before COVID, basically a rule that we would not fund anyone that we haven't met in person, so that we could really form relationships as a foundation of the flow of funding. And, as James said, financial capital is just a small part of the capital that we exchange. And we work with, we hope, with other forms of power and capital. So Other things that we're doing, one of my personal efforts in the last year has been to fund individuals basically with no requirement. So it's sort of like funding sabbaticals for people to do whatever work they want to do. So we don't have any expectations of product. We are funding leaders who have devoted their lives to a certain work that we feel is aligned with our mission. And we just expect that whatever happens will be of service. So that's a particularly rewarding way of grant making for me personally. We are also trying to totally get away from forms. So we do custom proposals, a lot of the time. In terms of trust in communities, that was one of the questions on our list to address. We do our best. We are revamping some of our investment strategies, and gosh, Be the Earth is really a leader and an inspiration there. And we hope we can learn from you guys about what you're doing and how you do it, because it just seems really just beautiful and inspiring. We, at some point, about 2.5 years ago, we realized we were not funding enough leaders of color working in urban communities or communities of color. And instead of just going out and finding people, we hired an African-American consultant who reached into her networks and introduced us to people. That's been an incredibly rewarding approach. And we are hoping that next year it will lead to some flow funding and a giving circle. I know that hiring an Indigenous program officer was critical in terms of community trust with Indigenous communities. And we hired our Indigenous program officer 2.5 years ago, I think, at this point. And let's see, I guess just to get back to the fact, that we're just human beings. And because our mission is overtly inclusive of a spiritual component, we just try to come back again and again to what that means for us without imposing it on other people. But to know that aside from financial capital, power, power is a really interesting and complex word and reality. Money and financial capital is definitely, certainly in this world, a force of change, but such a limited force of change if it's not working in harmony with other forces, whether that is deep creativity, love, care, awareness, and service beyond oneself, which is just a form of consciousness, how to tune into the needs around you. If we give funding to a project that is not subtly and powerfully attuned to the needs in their communities, then what's the point? And so again and again, because we have this spiritual component, we are committed to a spiritual vision of life and the interconnectedness of spirit and the earth and each other. So we always, as individuals, we have a spiritual practice, and we try to come back again and again to deep, deep honoring of people and their work. And we see power really as in the hands of the grantees to some degree. Who can we align with that are harnessing creativity?
Yeah. Hilary,
So,
can I, yeah, I'll just,
yes,
we need to move to the next presentation.
please do.
I want to hold this question about power because I think it's a very important question for us to discuss in the fishbowl. So yeah, I wrote it down because I think, yeah, what does power mean and how do we, I'm always thinking as funders, how at the same time we are working on the underlying structure so that philanthropy doesn't need to exist anymore. You know, I think that's that is part of the discussion that I'd love for us to have. But now I'd also like to move forward with the next presentation. And yeah, from the Earth Foundation, as I mentioned, they've been experimenting a lot with trust-based philanthropy and like the next stages of flow funding inspired by Marian Weber. And we're going to hear from Annie Rami, who's another fellow Brazilian. Sorry, today I can see so many people from South America. I think we're almost, I can't say majority, but there's a lot of us here. Venezuela, Argentina, Brazil. So Annie is an immigrant woman, artist, activist, and mother of three. She was a member of several activist communities and movements in Brazil focused on social and environmental regeneration. And as a result of participatory processes, so she also has a background in mobilization, campaigning, culture hacking, and now she's in the UK and is the communications and community. Yeah, she leads the communications and community at Be the Earth Foundation. So Annie, maybe share, yeah, it would be great for you to share with us the practical, you know, steps that Be the Earth took to really put some of these principles into reality. Thank you.
Thank you all. It's amazing to be here. I guess starting off this conversation with the idea that we are all humans and we all share this collective wish to a greater vision, yeah, to something that can at least give us a chance as humans to stay on planet Earth for this beautiful journey that it means to be a human here. And this is just a little contribution that I have today that is showing you, walking you through a little bit of the practicalities of flow funding, the program that we have been running for a year now, but it builds upon a bigger legacy, which is Marian Weber's legacy. For all of those that do not understand what flow funding means, basically it means to share power regarding decision makers. So you will see in a few minutes, how is it that we structured the program so it works in a very joyful way. And the idea is that we funders are committed to a deeper reflection regarding what is our role, and also amazing respect and acknowledgement of the beautiful work that people on the ground connected to the daily work of being a change maker are doing. So, you know, Marian Weber is the original creator of this methodology. There is a website, and if you visit Be the Earth's website, you can click directly to it. There's lots of information on how flow funding was created. But building on top of her legacy, we came up with a strategy to hold flow funding together. It's based on some cornerstones that I'm going to share with you. So there is this specific role regarding the funder. The funders are basically people and organizations that have access to financial resources, but at the same time are committed to challenging power dynamics. So there's a lot of an experimentation profile to these funders in a flow funding cycle, evidently knowing that this is a never growing work in process. No, there's no right or wrong. Much more of an experimental approach, yeah? There's another role that is very important in a flow funding circle, that is the initiator. I like to think of the initiator as the bridge, someone with sufficient amount of knowledge and relationships with people on the ground that can actually help wealth holders and funders to connect to strategic people, organizations, initiatives on the ground that can flow resources to the places that they are most needed. The initiator has also a very important role, which is actually keeping the circle together, giving it a rhythm, because flow funding at Be the Earth, it's all about human connection. Another role is the flow funders. They are evidently chosen by the initiator, and they are trusted with an amount of cash that they can distribute unrestrictedly. There are no ground rules exactly on how to distribute this fund. It is important to say, you've heard Renata say that we focus on regeneration of food systems and localization and indigenous knowledge. So we are initiators of a circle. And that means that when we choose our flow funders, we are basically looking for key stakeholders on these areas specifically. This is all done in a context of community building. So flow funders are supported by the initiator with well-being routines, connection, spiritual connection, and other types of approaches that can actually support their entire journey. It might seem trivial, but it's not, having resources and unrestricted resources to disperse. And evidently, there's another massive role that is the acceptor, which are the people that are going to be granted these resources. And their only commitment is basically to share stories, which leads us to what crosses the entire system, which is storytelling. The only element of exchange is that we are open and present to share each other's stories, challenges, and talk about the experience we are living. So flow funding, basically what we have seen is flow funding allowing resources to address issues of people and communities that are supposedly unreachable. They're not unreachable. It's just the structure that is not allowing this, the magic actually to happen. So you've seen here, it moved away so quickly. Last year we had 7 flow funders that worked that disbursed 42 unrestricted grants. It was a very small amount, so $84,000, but they made strategic choices based on their knowledge on the ground, where this money should go. And they reached 8 different countries, in England, Nepal, Haiti, Namibia, Tanzania, Kenya, South Africa, and Brazil. I'll give you a spoiler here. If you come to the website and click here, you can see our beta map on how this money flowed. So it's a very also intuitive flow. There's no control. So each one of the maps will hopefully be very different. And we have this number with, it's evidently an approximation, if that's a word. I'm sorry, I'm Brazilian. I don't know all the words. And that means that roughly 1,500 people were directly impacted, to our surprise, in the very regions and very themes that we think are very important at this day and age. So covering food sovereignty, community building, support to forest defenders, displaced people. The stories are fascinating. We are coming up with a technology to actually telling those stories. This is also still very emergent. It's happening as I speak. We are getting the reports, and not reports like the oral reports. They send us WhatsApp videos. They send us, it's completely open source. And from their reflections, I'm trying to get a sense of this heart keeping of flow funding. So what it means to be a flow funder, and you're going to listen to a flow funder herself, Raquel, that is going to speak right after me. And just to end up, flow funding for tomorrow, we are thinking that a good way of being connected and entangled in the web of life is looking at flow funding for 3 different approaches. One of them is, as today, we are always open to share knowledge. So anyone interested in knowing more, we will always be open to be in connection and tell this story for anyone who's interested. Be the Earth also looks for co-funding. So the idea of having strategic funders that are like us, interested in exploring the democratization of funds. We do have circles already in place and they wish to expand. So we are open for this type of collaboration. And also we are thinking about managing others funder circles with the expertise that we have already built so far. So the idea here is that we are absolutely open to whatever means to be at service for this greater world that we are helping to build. I guess that's now.
Okay,
that's
thank you
now.
so much, Annie. Thank you. Yeah, and then, yeah, it's a great comment also that we have in the chat about using DAOs and the decentralized governance systems and liquid democracy and blockchain to also support flow funding. You know, that's part of the conversation today. What are the tools and technologies and social technologies that can be in service of this work? And I think this conversation will not be complete without, you know, that the voice of also the people who are trusted to distribute the funds, and then how it feels like to be part of a program like this. So I'd like to invite another Brazilian, Raquel Rosenberg, who lives in Minas Gerais in Brazil, and she's an activist and social entrepreneur. And her life mission is to work with people and organizations that seek the convergence of ideas and purposes for balancing social relations, respect for the environment, and solidarity citizens. She co-founded Engajamundo, which is a youth mobilization organization, and also working with non-hierarchical teams and project development. She lived 2 years in the Amazon to strengthen the role of young people from traditional communities, and is a fellow of Ashoka Brazil and a board member of Open Democracy. So yeah, Raquel, yeah, great to see you here. And then I'm looking forward to hearing your stories. Yeah, what was it like? And what were you able to catalyze, yeah, with this unrestricted fund?
Thank you, Ruth. So good to be between Brazilians. It feels like home. I'm really, really happy to be here and be representing all this amazing team of Flanders, as we call ourselves, from Be the Earth. I wanted to start by telling you a little bit about my feelings as a Flow funder, because I'm a climate activist. So as Ruth said, I co-founded a youth-led network here in Brazil. And I'm used to share other types of capital, as Hillary was saying, with much love and compassion and care and tools for activism and this kind of stuff. So I often take like purpose and much love more than anything for not only traditional communities, but for young people all over Brazil. And that was the kind of exchange that I was used to do before I had this opportunity as a Flow funder. So for me, it was amazing because it was the first time that I had the responsibility of sharing also money and not only love and care and tools. So it was like really, really empowering for me, but also like really confusing because I wanted to like share with everyone, with most of the people that I met, especially during these couple of years that I spent living in the Amazon. So this was the first strategy that I decided upon, was to focus on this territory because of all the other funders that were together with us. They weren't focusing on the Amazon, and as a climate activist, I see this as one of our main responsibilities as Brazilians, to support the forest people who are there in the front lines. So this was my first decision as my strategy, because we didn't have any kind of direction from Be the Earth. The direction was follow your intuition and your heart. And this was amazing. Like, that's how I felt it. So I came up with the ideas and the strategies based on my intuition and my heart, and guided by it. I wanted to share with you a little bit of some of the stories that that we created together through this flow funding. So the first one is about Mr. Chico Cachitu. He lives in the Tapajós River, which has like lots of threats right now, especially on illegal mining. And he is actually under a death threat right now. So Be the Earth is also helping me to support that, because he had to leave his territory because of the threats that he was receiving. And this is a reality for like most of the forest defenders who are in the front lines. So Chico is 70-year-old, and he's an analphabet, and he's been fighting for his territory for like his entire life, more than we can imagine. And often the indigenous people have more visibility than the riverine as he is. So it's really important to see them as equal important as forest defenders, as the indigenous people. So I met Mr. Chico at the end of 2019, and I was like totally passionate about him. So when this opportunity came to me, my heart said, I want to support Mr. Chico somehow. And I reached out to him saying, I have this unique opportunity of sharing resources with you without having all the bureaucracy of making projects and having necessities of filling forms and everything you were talking about. And he was like, oh, I can't believe I want to do so many things here. So he had a list of how to defend his community, especially from the illegal miners. And they could do this with the association and this with the land and many things. But then when I talked to a friend that works together with him, they were both together, he said, okay, but this we can do like formal projects to defend the forest. What we cannot do is to give the opportunity for Mr. Chico to have a surgery for his eyes, because he's almost blind. He cannot see anymore, and he won't be able to defend the forest as he's doing his whole life without having his eyes. So I had the opportunity to give new eyes for Mr. Chico. And this was something that I couldn't have done in any kind of project. And it was amazing because he decided on based on like, oh, okay, I have this friend telling me this, but it wasn't his first guess. He didn't even tell me about his problem with his eyes because he's so jealous and he was all the time thinking about his community. But that's exactly why we need to support him and give him new eyes so that he can continue his amazing work. So this was one of the most inspiring stories that I had during this whole journey. But I was also able to do much more. When we had the problem with the blackouts in Amapá state here, they stayed for like almost 1 month without energy in the state. I was able to send money for the Quilombola community for them to buy water, only clean water. That's what they needed. And I said, yes, I can help you with that. And it's here already. And they were like, oh, and that's it. They were so surprised and they needed so much this support and in this urgency that was like so needed. So I had like a couple of stories like this one, but also some more structured ones with communities on Xingu, with indigenous communities. They had like the worst harvest that they've ever had. So they didn't have manioc, which is the basic food for them. And they were able to not only buy the manioc for doing their products, but also making all the necessary tools and things with the land so that they could plant for the next season. So it was also amazing to have the opportunity to support them with this food sovereignty. and also stories related to COVID, because the situation here in Brazil is really, really bad. So I supported a really famous and nice activist photographer here called Lilo Clareto in his memory, because he couldn't survive at the end. But we've made like a huge mobilization to take him from Altamira, where he used to live in the middle of the Amazon. And Altamira is where Belo Monte hydropower plant is. And because of a blackout right by the hydropower plant, the hospital stayed out of energy, and we needed to remove him from Altamira to São Paulo in 1 hour. And we were able to do this because of the support of people like myself, that I could make it through Flow Funding, and also other people that could support him. And he was transferred to Brazil, to São Paulo, which gave him a little bit more opportunity. But unfortunately, Lilo couldn't survive as many other Brazilians because of the situation that we live here. But yeah, I think it's very important anyways, and I wanted to bring this for Lilo's memory. So just one last story, Ruth, I know my time is already coming to an end. After speaking to Annie, she gave me the idea of trying to make like a refunding. So I talked to Angélica Mendes. She's the grandson of Chico Mendes, a really famous forest defender. And Angélica was the chosen one to be like the refunder first version. So I told her that I had X amount of money and that she could redistribute on however she wanted. And then Angélica had the same liberty and followed her intuition and her heart, and was able to distribute this in Acre, in a state that is often like forgiven and forgot by Brazilians here. And she distributed for slum communities in the urban city, also for prisoners, women prisoners in Rio Branco, and for the indigenous and riverine communities. So it was amazing also to see how this could work in many levels. So not only myself, but also trusting others that could trust others. And this can be like this big circle of life and heart and giving and receiving, and this big flow, which was the whole journey for me, and also for all the received this money. So just wanted to thank you again. It was amazing to live this whole journey together with you.
Thank you. A little, I get super emotional. Also because it's really interesting about the granddaughter of Chico Mendes. Chico Mendes was a very famous ecologist who was murdered in the 80s. And he was the one who managed to approve a law that you could have protected areas where you could also get materials from, so the extractivist reserves. And only when I visited the area and I met people within his group and his cousin and all, that I understood the importance of how much of the Amazon was still standing because of him and his activists. So this work of, again, sorry, I'm a nightmare. This work of really defending the defenders, and the defenders, it's impossible for them to go through many application forms. So yeah, really important work. Thank you. So let's see if I can get myself together and do this. Well, I just open a tab thinking about the Amazon. Right, so what we're gonna do now is invite more people into this discussion. We were gonna do breakout groups, but I'm not entirely sure we're gonna have time. So I think we can go straight into the fishbowl. I'm making this executive decision, team. Yeah, So the way this is going to work is we have our panelists, but we know how moving the stories are. You know, we're weaving here power, trust, like what's the role of philanthropy at the moment, together with, you know, how can we really scale the distribution of, you know, we say that in ecology, if a place is concentrating too much of a material, that's pollution, and that's very damaging to the environment. So how can we support the flow of resources to where resources can best serve life at this point? And, you know, funders have a super important role to play, but also projects and, you know, people like Renata or myself who were activists, and now we're in this, you know, in this place where we're deciding how funding happens, and many other funders and people connected to funding who's here right now. The way this is going to work is if you go where it says stop video on the bottom left, exactly, thank you, James. And you click on that little arrow and you go into your video settings and you press, you go into the video settings and then you see there, hide non-video participants. You need to click that hide non-video participants and making sure that that's clicked as the photo says. Thank you. And then what we're going to do is, if you would like to participate in the conversation, what we do is you raise your hand, which is on reactions. There is that smiley face saying reaction. I can press raise my hand. My hand is raised. And then Faith is going to give you some instructions for joining our panel. Now, what happens is, if I have that video clicked, when I stop my video, I disappeared. When I open my video, I appear. And then we can have people entering and leaving the panel. Let's see how this goes. It's a bit experimental. I've never done fishbowl on a webinar before. I've only done it in real life, but I'm trusting my friends from the Earth. So if everyone can go on stop video, click onto video settings, make sure you're ticking hide non-video participants, and then you can stop your video. And we should only have our panel members. Yeah. So please stop your video unless you're a panel member. Great. And I have my fellow panel members that are Raquel and Hillary and Annie. Faith, I think you can also stop the video for Barry and Anu. Yeah, and then the way we do is lift your hand. We're going to be having a conversation, and you can just raise your hand if you would like to join the conversation. So it's going to be a very open, you know, heartfelt conversation about, I'm going to start with a prompt question, which I think is important, which is, what are the conditions needed for trust to exist? Yeah, and how do we see those conditions being there, you know, being there as we do this work? So yeah, what are the conditions for trust? And then if you want to join to help answer this question, just raise your hand and yeah, and turn on your video when Faith, yeah, talks about it. So please join, this is a conversation. We're all Brazilians, except for Hillary, who's Brazilian at heart. So we just want to welcome into our forest living room. Yeah.
Just,
so, yeah,
just a tech question. I guess it's best that we remove the spotlight,
yeah.
and people have their view on gallery view. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Done.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good.
Gallery view. Yes. Got
Since I stole the mic,
right.
I'll give you
what are the conditions for trust to exist?
Relationships. I'll start from there. I guess that we have lost somewhere. We have lost the importance of being in a true, straightforward human relationship as part of the whole, as part of nature. It doesn't mean to be, it's not complicated, but we made it complicated. And trust does not grow where there's no relationship. So I would start like that.
That's exactly what I was gonna say. So yeah, just reinforcing how human relationships and heart became papers and forms. So that's really gets on the way. And it's complicated because you need to be accountable to a charity commission or whoever is supervising your foundation or whatever it is, your organization is, and you need to do a kind of due diligence. But I think the challenge is how to find in the middle of the way, somewhere that you know through relationship that these people or group or even individuals are doing amazing work, and that if they have access to resources, they will do magic happen like Raquel did. So I'm leaving now.
And Hilary, we also have, what's your name? I only see MP.
Yeah, that's it. MP.
Okay,
Not API. MP. Hi.
Hi. Yeah, do you want to add anything to the conversation about what do we need for trust to exist? And then I also have another question for Hilary.
Yeah, I think with that is communication, because I think we have to find out the best ways to communicate with each other, especially cross-culturally, and honesty, and how, you know, setting a framework for, yeah, really bringing about proper communication, what works for everybody.
And then I have a question for Hilary and Raquel as well, and for me and other people and Sherry. And we also have people that we have funded participating, you know, our friends from Uganda. Hilary, how does it work with I think with this, how do you build true relationship when there is such a big power difference between the person who has the money and the, you know, the grantee or the person who are receiving the funds? I'd love to hear from Raquel, Hilary, and then also any of the people who are in that side, in the project side, who's also part of us. Yeah.
Well, I would go back a little bit. I mean, when you say the people who have the money have a tremendous amount of power, I would go back to the early part where I articulated, and James did too, I think. Yep, James said that power is just, that money is just one.
Yeah, I'm being a little provocative here. I don't
okay, because I'll tell you just very quickly a story with one of our grantees. I went to a site visit to learn about his work. And after conversations about potential funding, he looked at me and he said, you know, I don't care about your money. And I said, you know, we understand that money is not all there is as well. And he said, great, now we can have a real conversation. And so and excuse me, my phone is ringing if you hear it. But I just come back to that story again and again, because it shows that you can have a real relationship when money is involved. And we hope that again and again, we can develop and come to those relationships.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I find it like, how do you move into authentic relationship? You know, I think it needs this deep understanding that we're actually equal, and that actually that wealth at the moment is so much more important, because it's the wealth that means we all have a future, right? Like financial wealth, you know, at some point is going to stop. It's causing more damage than good at the moment. Yeah. Raquel, yeah.
Exactly this. So what is the concept of relationship? Because in this networking society that we live, where you exchange business cards and then you have a relationship now, this is not the kind of relationship we're talking about. So for me, it's all based in care, of this love revolution that I speak a lot about. Like, we need to care and love for each other, and it doesn't depend on money, because I've been like my entire life in the other side on like building these relationships with honesty and making sure that it's an interdependent relationship. Because if you have money but the invaders are destroying the Amazon forest, we're all like in the same planet, and it's going to be destroyed if we don't have Mr. Chico Kachtu or the forest defenders over there. So it has to be seen like this, with the same like equal power on both sides.
Sherry, would you like to contribute? Yeah, about the conditions for trust and the power relations, and how to have authentic relationships.
Yeah, well, we could just have a long, wonderful conversation about all that. I just love that that's the first question. It reminds me of Janine Benyus, where she says, what are we really doing here? We're creating the conditions for life to thrive. And I feel like that's what we are remembering as we're remembering we are nature and we are all life. And that separation thing we did with the mechanistic universe really threw us out of right relationship with each other. And that extractive, it's those worldviews that have really had an impact of extraction and separation more than I think we know. So trust, when you don't need to compete, like the competing for resources. I've been an activist for a couple decades, and we would compete with each other, and funders weren't tuning into the fact that we needed synergy. So I'm so happy that the model of philanthropy is evolving and that it's being led by women. It's like, I can't even tell you. I think also another condition for trust to exist is to realize that trust is not just a stable thing that's a noun. Trust is actually a verb, and you're always in a process of building trust, and it can something can happen, and then you have practices for how are we restoring trust and what are the agreements that we have for restoring trust. I think that's important. And then to give ourselves a lot of self-love and forgiveness, because we're fallible and we're learning. And so when we see ourselves in this container of the integrators, the people with money and the people with projects, there are these dynamics. It's a whole system dynamic that we're actually engaging in, and that we're learning to share power. You know, we've had power over for a long time, and the edge of evolution, and I think in a lot of ways, is learning how to share power and recognize that wealth is not just the dollars, but wealth is the whole system that's there, and we're learning how to be more supportive of the whole system.
Thank you. I wanted to move this to a very pragmatic aspect of this discussion, because we as Regenerosity have this question over and over. And Tessa, it's great that you're here as well, because you're also working with the investment part, which is the balance between what's the right amount of due diligence. And, you know, in an ideal world, we're all operating in this trust-based networks, but how do we get there? And then, yeah, I'd also love to hear, because as I said, there are projects that are being funded right now that are part of this group. So how do we, yeah, what is the right amount of due diligence? Yeah.
I think actually, in a way, that's connected to what was just being said. Well, something I was going to say to comment in response to your previous question, which is actually like, as a funder, we think not necessarily. Often people think they have the quote unquote right, or, you know, because they hold that wealth, they should choose where the money is most needed or where it goes and control that. And that's actually quite similar in due diligence. If you're not the expert, ask another expert. And oftentimes due diligence doesn't need to mean digging into some business's history, financials, and so on and so forth, but build relationships around them, ask people who you already know and trust. And I think, yeah, due diligence really needs to transform a lot, especially when it comes to philanthropy, but also when it comes to for-profit investment, and that people are spending so much time, and really you can't guarantee what's going to happen. The people that are giving presentations have spent hours and hours constructing it based on how they think the funder wants to see it, right? So at the end of the day, what you're investing in is a story. And that's great, but some people are better at telling stories than others. So again, it's really all should be more relationship focused. And I think that due diligence needs to transform into something where you're asking your network and harnessing the relationships that you have built, because otherwise you're just taking a punt. And what's the point, you know?
Yeah, that's a great comment. Thank you. Hillary, anything to say about due diligence?
I wanted to just echo something Raquel said about intuition, because I'm not sure we can really name what comes through that honest, open, vulnerable relationship in terms of the wisdom that comes, or the intelligence, or the insights, and I think intuition is just really important. And it's unnameable when you have often, and then you take the unnameable and try to quantify it or describe it or tell a story about it. But there's got to be a way to trust oneself as well, as we move through difficult decision-making around where resources flow.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I can see that at Lush and the work that we do at Lush, and how, like, yeah, just to tell a very brief story now that James is here and we work together, and it's like, we received the MD from Lush said, oh, we haven't given enough money this year. Here you go. You have 150,000 pounds, not a lot of money, to distribute before the end of the financial year. Even though like Lush is not even making so much money this year, he was like, oh, I'm panicking because it's the end of the financial year and we haven't distributed the wealth. So we had to make decisions on how to spend 150,000 in, I don't know, 2 weeks and distribute the money. And then you really tap into our networks and, where is the proxy for trust that it's coming from? We're sitting on applications from Spring Prize. We have a history and a track record. We know, we reached out to Be the Earth, and they recommended some people. It's like, how do we really, we were able to distribute the money really quickly. So yeah, that's, without a lot of due diligence. But again, we don't need a contract. We do a contract, right, James? But I think in this case, it was pretty unrestricted funding. Not always the case, but yeah. So James, yeah, how do you want to contribute to this?
Yeah, it was very simple, the contract. It's true. I was actually going to share the same story, Ruth, around because I think it's a really interesting idea of like relying on the relationships that we've built in the past, and seeing the power of that we can move money so quickly in this scenario. And we also used this, didn't we, Ruth, in a way to also help us build relationships, because if we're thinking about reciprocity, sometimes there are relationships where funders can expect, and I'm sure we've done it at Lush in the past and really, taken on feedback. I'm sure it might have happened, but I'm sure there are spaces where funders ask quite a lot for applications and you actually don't get anything in return for that process. And while we were saying before, and I really agree with Hillary's point about, financial wealth is just one form of wealth. There are many forms of wealth. And also balancing that with the fact that people need to eat, people need to pay their way. People sometimes do need finances. And I think sometimes one thing that I think worked really well was giving a little bit of money for this relationship building process, and giving a very small grant just for this, to show trust on our end as funders as well too. And I thought that was powerful. Thank you.
Great. Renata?
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, I was going to say one thing, but now I'm going to say two, because actually in flow funding, the first circle, the people like Raquel, the flow funders, they were volunteers. And this was the original format that Marian Weber created, the flow funding, and we wanted to honor it and experiment in that way. And actually, by the end, we were like, oh my God, that's a lot of work. And they all felt so much responsibility, and they put a lot of time, and their whole network and all the amazing people they're flowing the money to, they only know because of their track record and all the years of experience they have. So now for the second year, we're also giving them money to recognize that knowledge and that network and that time, because as James said, okay, love and belonging and feeling great, it's amazing, but you do need to pay your bills. And we know how being activists is really hard to make it financial viable, right? So that's one thing. And then another one is more provocation, because we started talking about relationship, which I did as well. And also how we ask our friends and trusted ones, like who they did the due diligence and all that, but that kind of closes a loop of people that have access to funding. So how can we
Very good.
I have no idea how to answer that. That's why I'm genuinely asking you, everyone here in this call, because we do want to trust and build relationship and go without the diligence when we know they're doing amazing work. But that means like there's a limit of how many people we can know in that level of deepness, right? So how can we get out of the loop of only funding the same people? And I think flow funding is one way of doing it. So I'm curious to hear other ways.
I just jumped in because I have the same concern. And I guess there's an invitation here that we should not be that naive in thinking that we will have relationships and solid relationships with everyone on planet Earth. Trust is the opposite of that, is believing, actually having a surrender to the idea that the relationship that I built here, and it's generous and it's loving with you, this goes forward to the ones that you are in relationship with. And this is what systems is about. So it's not like as funders, we can map whatever the money goes. Flow funding has a good intention, which is kind of like a rhizome. Is that a word? Rhizoma in Portuguese.
Rhizome, yeah.
Yeah. So like each one of the nodes spreads to different circles, and that's the intention of growing the circles, working as nature grows, and not exactly keeping it in a closed loop. That's not the original idea of the program. And at the same time, I guess the invitation here is for us, all of us. It doesn't matter where we are. We all have a role. Mm-hmm. And it's important to keep that question going. So what is the role? We have faced many difficulties with flow funding year one regarding bureaucracy to send money to other countries. And it's boring work, but that's our role. It's not like we are going to put that into the grantees or the acceptor's hand into figuring out how is it that he is going to receive the money. No, we're going to share with the people that have a little bit more privilege, that have a little bit more means to solve things with banks and contracts and stuff that we had to solve. So at the same time, it comes with responsibility, because we funders have to be in the place to tackle with the things that are very boring and kind of keep the flow going lighter to the ones that are doing actually so much, and at the same time wouldn't have the means to receive money if they had to write enormous reports or stuff for the bank or stuff like that. So yeah, exploring our role is massively important, and keeping that as a question.
Yeah, that's great. And all right, folks, I think, are there any more with their hands up? Anyone else with their hands up?
No, none of them.
I would love to hear. There are also some projects here, and I still have one leftover question that I had, which was how, because we've all been here, you know, me, you, Anne, Renata, lots of people here have been on both sides where we are fundraising for projects because we're part of projects. We're also distributing funds, so we know what it's like to be on both sides. And I think I have a question, which is how then, as projects, do we also help build trust? You know, how do we help create the system of trust without, like, I also think there is something about the dignity of projects that are not looking like to strengthen their capacity to not look at funders as this, you know, mighty people who are going to be the savior and who own the wealth, because, you know, that this systemic disempowerment, systemic racism, structural oppression, and everything that permeates philanthropy. How can projects also support to create a more trusting environment where they are honored for the wealth and that they hold? I think that's also something I think about it. Yeah, if anyone wants to share, that would also be, yeah, that's it. How do we change the conversation, and how do we as fundees also support that change? You know, because yeah, I find that really interesting. Yeah, anyone has any comments about this, you can put it in the chat if you don't want to appear on the panel, or yeah, but yeah, that question of how do we also create trust from the project level. Yeah, and I was even gonna say, yeah, also Raquel, if you want to come back, or Jenny just raised her hand. Yeah, to help answer that question. How do we help build trust from the project? And Hi, Jenny.
Hi, can I talk? I'm driving, so I don't even know if my video's on, but
yeah.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. I'll just take a minute here and just say thank you from the bottom of my heart. I'm very, very moved by what's happening here, and very grateful that I made it to this call. And I will say, as a one who through our project is, you know, often seeking funding, one of the things that feels important to me as one of the founders of the initiative, Springhouse, is that we continue to do the practice and the work of not orienting around money as a primary power or even higher power, which is much of what our culture at large does. And so it's doing that work of continuing to orient around staying in our bodies, orienting around something bigger than us, this life source, and taking care of life right here and now in our initiative. And see that practice that we do as a staff all the time at Springhouse reminds us that money is one resource. We're going to continue doing the work that we do in the ways that we do it, and that money certainly helps us do that, but it is not the fundamental power that guides us or that we ultimately need to do this work.
Yeah, I really love that. Of like, it was that conversation that Hillary shared where, you know, the project also said, you know, this is not about money. This is, yeah, Hillary, I'm glad. Exactly. It's like not orienting around money. Yeah, that's sometimes it's, yes. I think it's also easier said than done, depending on how, you know, the level of need, but yes. Even with a deep level of need, yes. Really, this is not about money. This is about the work for both sides, right? Yeah.
Yes, yes, and all the complexities and difficulty that goes along with that. I'm definitely not saying it's easy work, but for us, it's worth doing as a community. Thank you.
Thank you. Folks, I'd also like to begin to wrap this up, because if there are no more, Maroon's just joining right now. So yeah. Okay, Tinka has video issues, but Tinka is also, Tinka has an amazing project connected to biodiversity, conservation, agriculture. Noah as well. Noah, do you want to join? Noah has been in our webinars before, and they are also two of the projects that we're supporting with, just supporting their amazing work in Uganda and in Kenya, Tinka. All right, folks. So I think I'm going to wrap this up. If everyone can turn their video. Oh, there you go, Noah. Hi. Okay. Do you want to share from a project's perspective, like how to build trust? I think it'd be great to hear you.
Yeah, I think I'd put something in the chat room. I thought it's important for the projects also to be doing the best right things. One of the things I think which are key is being open about any challenges, any things that didn't work well with the people that are supporting the projects, and also sharing the best experiences, stories, right reporting, and things like that. I think trust is an ongoing kind of activity. It's not going to come just one day. Just like someone said, it's a verb, and I think it needs to be nurtured. We need to continue, keep on doing the right things, communicate effectively, open up whenever things are not, working well, and of course, when they're working well, still share, the successes and the good stories. Yeah, that would be key as well.
Thank you, Noah, and I agree. Like I'm on this I wear so many hats, but having this trust that there is not a punishment. We're not talking about punishment here, and also creating the conditions for authenticity and for projects to be able to be forthcoming about if they're having blockages or having difficulties. And yeah, this idea of going at the speed of trust is definitely the case. So I'm going to end with that quote, and I'll just ask to hear from Amanda, the Heart Keeper, if you want to do our last remarks. I think the Heart Keeper had a big job today. Like, my heart is also really full. Mark, I was also hoping you would join to share about the tools, but we can share that later with the people that came to this webinar. Amanda, if you're there and you want to share a bit as your heart keeper role before we wrap up. But yeah, thank you everyone. And then also, yeah, and then also Faith to close for the next steps and sharing how to get in touch with us, etc. But yeah, heart keeper, yeah, Amanda or yeah.
Can you hear me all right?
I don't know if Amanda's, there you are. Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Yeah, so when Raquel was sharing her stories, there's a lot of people kind of like leaning into the screen and like visibly touching their chests. Raquel, when you were talking about following your intuition specifically, there was a lot of like warmth coming from people. And when you spoke about Mr. Shiku and how he works harder and longer than any of us can imagine, you could like see everyone kind of take that in and try, attempt to imagine. Lots of nods of acknowledgement there. Ruth, obviously, when your taps opened up, I think we all have deep wells of that feeling around the Amazon. Oops, tapped into mine. But yeah, around how Chico Mendes did his work and the importance of defending the defenders and yeah, people who aren't going to fill out grant applications still needing support. And yeah, and then Raquel, again, when you were talking about power, people were leaning in. It really seemed like when you were talking about your work with the defenders, people saw that as a form of capital that they wanted to know more about, like your closeness with the work, at least for the people on this screen, is something that's admired and uplifted. So that's it. Thanks all.
Beautiful. Thank you, Amanda. And I just want to say thank you to Annie and Renata and Raquel and Hillary and to the projects that came. We invited all of our projects that for Regenerosity, and almost everybody showed up. And it's really deeply touching for us to have the people that we're working with and for present today. We're continuing to grow and to learn and to really explore this field of what is trust-based philanthropy and what does trust mean within giving and through the model of flow funding and other models. So we'd love for you guys to continue to stay in touch with all of us. I'll put the links in the chat for Be the Earth Foundation and Calliopedia and Regenerosity, and would love for you all to continue to engage. We have a platform called Hilo that will invite all of you to continue the conversation. This is just an ounce of this conversation or a little touch into this conversation. And this is our second conversation on trust-based philanthropy. I wanna give a huge shout out to Ruth for holding space for this and for doing so much work and really giving her heart and soul into all of the work that she does. But please do continue to stay in touch. We'll put the links for our LinkedIn account, our Hilo. We will be sending out the video to everybody that's participated and to anybody else that said that they were going to come. We continue to record all of our webinars, and we hold monthly or every other month webinars, depending on our level of work. But just know that we hold you all in high regard, and you're all part of this community and we're all wealth holders of some sort. So we appreciate you deeply, and yeah, a deep bow of gratitude to you all. If you want to come off mute and just say gratitude, whatever you'd like to say to our speakers and to the community, please do.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Very inspiring.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Bye. Thank you all.
Thank you, Hillary. Great to meet you.
Thank you.
Just a quick
thank you.
We'll be following up with the video and the chat log as well, because there was a lot of richness within the chat log. So yeah, thank you all again, and we'll see you on the next webinar. Take care.
Thank you.
Annie, you were amazing.
Hey.